How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, we hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
So, this week, join us for our longest episode yet, as we have a 400-year-long discussion of Sally Potter's 1992 adaptation of Orlando. I'm going to move my mic into frame.
You didn't warn me ahead of time. I didn't schedule out 400 years for this.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Parker, it was in the memo.
Max, I planned on 200 at most.
No, remember I wrote down on with quill and ink on some parchment, and I mailed it to you. Well, really what happened was Will was over, and I said, Will, give me your handsome leg. And then I slipped the memo into his leg. So he was supposed to give it to you.
Well, he's in Texas, so it's not here.
Well,
I don't know what
this is going to be 400 years long, so buckle up.
Okay.
Welcome back to the show, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Parker, you didn't know anything about Orlando.
I knew nothing about this movie, other than just you liked it and you wanted to watch it.
Great.
That was like literally, I had no context for this. I knew Tilda Swinton was in it. That was about it.
Okay. You hadn't seen the poster.
Hadn't seen the poster, hadn't seen a trailer, didn't read a synopsis.
I had mentioned it to you before, because I watched it last year.
Yeah.
Around the same time of year. I watched it for the first time last year. I don't even remember how I learned about it. I think I was just like, I don't even know how I would have.
Might have been like a library poll for you or something, maybe?
No, it was, but I don't know if it was like I saw it on a shelf or I feel like I must have known about it beforehand. But I didn't know too much, because when I watched this for the first time going in, I had seen the cover with Tilda Swinton and Billy Zane where they're in bed. And I just assumed that Billy Zane was Orlando.
Yeah.
And then the movie started with Tilda Swinton, and it was like, this is Orlando. And I went, oh. So Tilda Swinton's playing a man. Cool. And then about halfway through the movie, I went, but we'll get to that. So I've been curious about Orlando because I watched it and I loved it. And then I read a Letterboxd review that was a little more critical of the movie than I would have been. And I couldn't find that review this time. When I went to look for it, I couldn't find it. I didn't like the review for some reason, but I really liked that review because it talked about how the movie changed things from the book, and it talked about it. It was written by someone who is trans, and I thought it was really interesting, and I don't remember anything that they said. So, but it lingered in my head long enough that when I had put Orlando down for the show, and I think the reason I wanted to bring this to the show is because it almost feels like a movie that would be like, I don't know, more well-known. I don't know. It's like this historical epic, right? It's like a period piece in multiple periods. And there's like such great costumes and production design in this. And it just kind of has the feeling of like, obviously not, but like the feeling of like a Lawrence of Arabia, the feeling of like something like that, just a little bit, but like smaller budget, obviously, and doing something completely different. So maybe it's nothing like that at all. But it felt like we could bring it on the show. So when I put it down to bring it on the show, I was like, well, I just keep thinking about that review that I can't find. And I was like, I'm interested in reading it. So everyone, my background's blurred, so it's not focusing on the book, but I read Orlando. I read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, published in October of 1928.
Wow.
I read it before we watched the movie. Reads? I know, imagine. I don't just watch movies, Parker.
Max is literate?
Oh, this is the end of the show. Parker refuses to do a podcast with someone who reads.
Can't do it, no.
Parker thinks that all literature in America is dead.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, he says literature is dead in America. And I go, oh, and this is a really awkward time for me to present you with my manuscript. It's about you. Anyway, but Orlando, the book I read, it's really interesting. It's very like poetic. And actually, I was just reading an interview with Sally Potter, the director of this film, and she described it as very like stream of consciousness, which is what Virginia Woolf was going for. Was very like, it's very like exteriorizing a stream of consciousness, and you get that sensation The book is primarily about poetry, and it's about Orlando's internal existence more so, which is interesting because it's also written from the perspective of a biographer, but you also get the sense as you go along, you're like, well, only one person could be writing this. And apparently it was written as a satire of another poet and writer at the time, who Vita, what's her name? Oh God, I should have written that one down.
Can't help
but
it.
it was a close friend and lover
read.
of. Okay, yes, you've made that very clear, Parker. Parker, I've actually never changed the intro to the show, and Parker just every week can't remember what it is and refuses to read it, so he just changes it every time.
That's exactly right. And I just happen to change it to the exact same thing every time.
Right, yeah. You have a great memory.
I'm interrupting your very good research. Continue.
No, it's fine. So it's a satire. But yeah, so I didn't look too much into the satirical nature of the book. If I'd had more time, I absolutely would have. But the book is really good.
Yeah.
I recommend it. It's really interesting. It's one of her more well-known books. And especially some of the things that she says about like gender in it. Because for those of you who don't know, Orlando, the story, both in the book and in the movie, is about a nobleman in like the 1600s?
1600s. Like,
it starts
it's exactly
in
1600.
Yeah. About a nobleman in the a nobleman in the 1600s who just kind of, in the book, he just kind of happens to live for like 400 to 600 years. And about halfway through that period, Orlando just completely changes sex and becomes a woman overnight. And in the book, there is like a trio of women who come in and they sing a little song. And also, apparently, I didn't get this from the book, but apparently it's like hinted that it was from this woman that he had like married. So, but the movie doesn't do that. So let's talk about what the movie does. Mm-hmm. It follows a nobleman named Orlando from 1600. He is made mascot of Queen Elizabeth I. She's really captivated by him and finds him very beautiful. And she gives him the rights to this property of land and says that he and his heirs will be able to keep it forever, so long as he never ages, he never withers, he never dies. And then Orlando goes home and he goes, what a strange person. Because Orlando talks to the audience. It's a fourth wall break. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the first section. And then they are visited during the Great Frost period of England's history, which is a real period of history in which the Thames just froze over. And people just kind of built markets on it and just kind of lived on there until it melted and washed everyone away. But basically, he meets a Russian woman there, or a Cossack, I guess is what they refer to them as. Her name is Sasha. She has a much longer name, as the names often are from that region. But and he basically abandons his fiance for this woman. And then when the ice melts, they all sail away, and he's kind of heartbroken. She leaves him, and he determines that women and love are awful, and he doesn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah.
And then like 50 years goes by, and he has started doing poetry. He really loves poetry. So he invites a poet named Nick Green to his house, and basically is like really excited to talk to him about literature, and is like, maybe he'll read my poems. And Nick Green shows up and is basically like, just kind of only has come because he thinks that Orlando will pay him, will give him money because he's poor, and really hates literature of the time. And he publishes a really scathing criticism of Orlando's poems. So Orlando burns the poems and decides to become an ambassador to, what country was it? Oh, it's Constantinople.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so he becomes British ambassador to Constantinople, basically to run away from all of this. Mm-hmm. He's there for an indeterminate amount of time. It was supposed to be a decade, but you definitely get the sense that it was maybe like longer. 70 years.
Yeah.
And he's there and he kind of gets to know this culture. And then at the end of that period of his life, is it okay that I'm just doing this quick summary?
Yeah, please.
Okay, great. There's the enemy arrives at Constantinople's door and they're like, will you take arms? He goes, "You want me to take arms?" And so he goes into the war, and he sees one man die, and he leaves. And then basically that night is when Orlando becomes a woman. And she turns to camera, and she says, "Same person, just a different sex, no change at all. No change whatsoever."
Yeah.
And then she returns to England and quickly finds that things are different now because she tries to engage with society, and men are really awful and talk about how women actually can't do that and aren't smart and have no opinions of their own and are basically grown children, or just children, And then she also finds out that she can't legally own her house because Orlando is legally dead and also is now a woman, which is basically the same thing, and cannot hold any property rights. And unless, whatever. And so then someone, we're skipping over a lot of people, like Archduke Harry is like, "Can I marry you?" And she goes, "No." And everyone's kind of bothering her about this. And she just escapes into this maze of green. And this is like probably the most iconic part of the movie.
Yeah, like this was the poster I saw once I started looking into the movie.
Yeah, so she runs into this labyrinth of like this garden maze and comes out of it, and it has been 100 years?
I think so.
Yeah. And it's a really fun transition of like dress. Like basically she just escapes into this labyrinth that comes out the other end, and it's now 1800 or 1850. I believe, because now we're in the sex part of the movie, because each of these sections are divided into
like chapters.
Into chapters. So the first one is
death, isn't it?
Yeah, the first one is death, and then it's love, and then it's poetry, and then it's politics, and then it's society, and now we have arrived at sex. And it is pretty awesome to just have a movie show a giant title card that just says sex. Funny for the internet, I'm sure, if the internet knew about this movie. And then she pretty much immediately meets Shelmerdine, who is played by Billy Zane, who gets top billing, even though second billing, even though he's only in it for 15 minutes.
I was shocked how short his screen time was.
I mean, there's not really anyone else that has, like, it's basically Tilda's movie.
Totally.
Right? Like, there's no one else that has as much, like, screen time. Like, you could argue, like, Quentin Crisp is maybe third billing.
Yeah, maybe.
But I doubt that they would have given him second or third billing because of the nature of his portrayal. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then she meets Shelmerdine, who is this American ?
That's what I gathered?
Yeah, because he's returning to America. He's a soldier in the war. And basically she's immediately like, "Do you want to get married?" And he's like, "Yeah, I would." And what's interesting is that in the book, they do actually just get married within minutes. They just go, they run in and someone's inefficient and they just get married really fast.
Sure.
But there's a lot more context to why this relationship happens in the book that's not in the movie. And we're not going to dive into that. This isn't better than the book. This is better than Citizen Kane. So, so anyway, they fall in love. They sleep together. And also there's this moment where Orlando is like, "Wait, if I were a man," and Billy Zane's like, "If you were a man," and then she goes, this. And she says that I would maybe perhaps not want to die in war because I think that's stupid.
Yeah.
And maybe, free myself from having to do that and become a woman. And then Shelmerdine's like, "Yeah, and if I were a woman, maybe I would think it's dumb to like waste my life and like risk my life raising children and instead want to risk my life fighting for freedom and liberty.
Yeah.
And maybe in order to do that, I might become," and he trails off. And then Orlando says, "a real woman." And it's very interesting because also in the book, it is just outright, they just immediately recognize each other. And Shelmerdine goes, "Oh, you were a man." And she goes, "Oh, you were a woman." And then that's kind of a huge connection point for them. In this, they like give reason to it. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, and so then they sleep together. And then the next day, Orlando's like, "Oh, by the way, do you want to have a kid with me? Because I need a kid because otherwise I'm going to lose my house." And Billy Zane Shelmerdine just kind of goes, I don't know. No, because they kind of leave it off there, right?
Yeah.
He goes back to America because he has to go fight for liberty because the wind is, southwest. So that happens. And then the last section is birth, in which we see briefly Orlando stumbling through World War I, pregnant. And then it immediately goes to modern day, 1992, the year this movie came out, which is interesting because the book ended in 1928, contemporary, and the movie adapts that to mean we just end where the book ends, right? Which is contemporary. It's 1992. Orlando has a daughter who also seems to age at a very slow rate, which makes sense with Queen Elizabeth's whole promise.
Right.
And she sells this poem that she's written, and then they go back to the house that she used to own but lost. And I just clocked that it's because she didn't have a son, which is also interesting because in the book she does have a son, but that also doesn't play at all into the lawsuit. The lawsuit in both texts is completely arbitrary.
Interesting.
It's just kind of like, well, I mean, in the movie, literally they like, like, you can't have this house in like 1750, and then 150 years go by, and then she goes, "Oh, the lawsuit's done."
Yeah.
Time is loose, and she has a daughter, and they return back, and they sit on a hill, and her daughter's running around with a little video camera, a little camcorder, 'cause it's the 90s, and there's a really nice like mirroring narration of like she was 400 years old, but because this was England, everyone pretended not to notice. And a song is sung, and Orlando says, "Look up there," and we see in the camcorder it pans up, and there is a poorly composited angel man singing the song at the end, and that's how the movie ends.
Yeah,
that's Orlando.
That's Orlando.
Now I think we can kind of dive more into kind of moments. Parker, what really stood out to you about this? What do you like, and what kind of did you bump up against in this movie? As someone who hasn't read the book.
Yeah. I really like Tilda Swinton's performance throughout the whole thing. Just like so ethereal is a word that comes to mind. Just like otherworldly the entire time. Like even before this like promise curse is put upon him by Queen Elizabeth. Like there's just something very otherworldly about Tilda's performance as Orlando that I like a lot, and like she really just carries the entire movie.
She portrays Orlando in almost like a foppish way at the start, especially when he's like waving at Nick Green from the shore. It's very endearing. Like he's very endearing even when he's saying like bullshit things about how women are terrible, the treachery of women and stuff, but it's also very knowingly.
Like it's interesting seeing the passage of time is so extreme, but like the development of a human being is still structured, there's something very immature about like those first 3 sections of Orlando. Like again, that kind of foppishness, like almost a level of innocence. Yeah. Where like you said, like, comments about like women suck so much. It's just like, it's like hearing a 13-year-old talk about that after their first time. It's like, I don't like girls. Girls are mean. I'm never going to like a girl again. Like, it's just like, it's kind of funny and silly, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I really like that. Production design was nuts because you looked it up, and the budget for this was $4 million at the time.
Yeah, which at the time, which in modern dollars is like equivalent to just under 10 million.
Yeah, which is... They're stretching that a long way.
They really are for
all these different periods they're doing.
Yeah, from like production and costuming, like it's pretty impressive that they were able to do that with the budget that they had.
I think the only time that I was really noticing it was anytime they tried to give the film more scale. So like the battle scenes and then that brief like World War I section. Is really empty and barren. Like there's not many people there. And like that's where it's like, okay, like a lot of the money went to the costumes, and so you can't hire as many extras and things like that. But that was really the only place I noticed it being.
Yeah, I mean, it almost reminds me of The Green Knight from a few years ago, directed by David Lowery, of like that was $15 million today, which would be a similar budget in 1990, if this is like almost 10 million today. Which also kind of, I mean, obviously that has the benefit of like visual effects that are done, but that movie also wears its budget really well.
Totally.
You know? Yeah.
100%. I was thinking a lot about The Green Knight, of just like comparable budget range and period piece, and just like utilizing that to the best of their advantage. And so I think there's a lot of that going on here. I liked all of those things. I liked Billy Zane's performance, even though it was kind of brief. Like, we didn't get spend much time with Billy Zane, but I liked him a lot. Had a surprise Toby Jones in the middle of the movie.
This is his film debut, I found out.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
this is the
nuts.
first film in which Toby Jones acted. Which is great.
Wow. Love that. Yeah, so those things I liked a lot. I liked, again, just like for early 90s, I think this is a really bold take on the ideas of gender. Like, that's just very interesting to me that this even got made in 92?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just very, very interesting to me. I think one thing that I did rub up against slightly, and you and I talked about this, and I've had more time to kind of sit on it, and it doesn't ruin the movie for me by any stretch of the imagination, but it is like viewing it through a modern lens has been interesting, just because like that conversation you were talking about between I can never remember Billy Zane's character.
Shelmer Dean.
Shelmer Dean, thank you. Shelmer Dean or Orlando. Like, it's interesting to me that both of their kind of landing points textually, and there's a lot going on subtextually, obviously, but like textually, just like what's in the film, it is interesting to me, like their conversation ending with this idea of like, well, I am a man because I make war, and I am a woman because I have a child. And like, that's a very didactic read on my part. There's obviously a lot more complexity there, but like, that is one element that I did kind of rub up against, that the movie doesn't have time to really examine any further than that. And so we do kind of just end on, like you said, like the final section being birth and Orlando and her child. And that feeling like an affirmation of her womanhood, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, like obviously, but just feels maybe a bit limiting when the rest of the movie is so broad and progressive in its ideas about gender.
Yeah. Right. I did have a note here from the director.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of looking at that again, because I similarly have been thinking about that. Mm-hmm. Right. Of like, the book doesn't explain much.
Yeah.
These are just things that kind of happen to Orlando, and Orlando never once is like, I think it's because I had to do this. And like we talked about, it can be taken and interpreted and read in a way that is very like, this is what genders are for, you know? Right. And something else that I think is interesting is taking a text that is so kind of open about gender, and I have some passages I'll read as well, and kind of explicitly using it to compare and contrast male identity with female identity. And that, I think, is where it's interesting, is that the book is almost more like open-minded than the film is, because the film is explicitly saying like, and this is what men are like, and this is what women are like, you know? And so actually there's this quote, and again, I don't have a source for this. This is from, I did forget, this is from the IMDb trivia page, so you know everybody, but this is a quote from Sally Potter where she argued that whereas the novel could withstand abstraction and arbitrariness, such as Orlando's change of sex, cinema is more pragmatic. There had to be reasons, however flimsy, to propel us along a journey based itself on a kind of suspension of disbelief. Thus, Queen Elizabeth bestows Orlando's long life upon him, whereas in the book it remains unexplained, and Orlando's change of sex in the film is the result of his having reached a crisis point, a crisis of masculine identity. Mm-hmm. So she is aware that she's changing it from the book, and she views it as film cannot afford to be abstract in that way, which is interesting to me, primarily because, you know, abstract film is a thing.
Right.
But I think I can see where she's coming from if she's creating a studio film, not studio, but, you know, like production, you know, she got producers on this. It's not like a fully independent, you know. Yeah. Sorry, I'm using those terms incorrectly. But I see where she's coming from in that she's like, well, we can't just make a narrative film about this and not give people reason.
Right.
Because people are less willing to be like, oh, well, that doesn't make much sense, but it's doing it intentionally. People would be like, well, why? Right. And I think that's interesting. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, but keeping in mind it was 1988 when she started writing this.
Totally. And like I can see where she's coming from with that 100%.
Right.
I also am not sure that I 100% agree with that thought process, but like it tracks, like it fully makes sense to me,
Totally. When she first started pitching her treatment in 1984, which is, again, even bolder, perhaps.
Yeah.
And she was told by industry professionals that the story was unmakeable. That had been long considered, that this would be unadaptable, right? But even though people were saying that, in 1988 she began writing the script and raising money. And ultimately, this did take 7 years to fully come to fruition. From inception to release. Yeah. It was 7 years. She also worked closely with Tilda Swinton, who came onto the project pretty early on and was like, yes, let's do this. And they spent 4 years together kind of creating what the character would be like, doing photo shoots to kind of figure it out. And actually from those photo shoots they did, that's how the fourth wall break kind of came to be. Because, let's see, I have another quote from her here. Let's see. I may have lost it, but basically she was saying how that kind of came to be because the book is so interior that having Orlando turn to speak to the audience made sense in that way, right? There's also this interview with her. This is this interview that she did in 1993 with the BFI has a lot of good quotes, and I've only just started to scratch the surface on it. I found it just before we were recording, and I'm so mad about it. I wish I had why did I make a whole dossier for The Greatest Showman and not for Orlando? Who knows? Because that was the prank, That
was the prank.
So she describes something of the process of adapting the novel into the film. And she says, it was a process of reading, rereading, and reading again, writing, rewriting, and writing again, cutting characters, stripping things right back to the bone. I did endless skeleton diagrammatic plots, all to find the guiding principle, and then reconstruct the story from the inside out. I also went back to research Woolf's sources, and then, finally, I put the book away entirely for at least the year of writing and treated the script as something in its own right, as if the book had never existed. I felt that by the time we were getting ready to shoot, I knew the book well enough, was enough in touch with its spirit, that it would have been a disservice to be lavish to it. What I had to find was a live, cinematic form, which meant being ruthless with the novel. In other words, I learned that you have to be cruel to the novel in order to be kind to the film. And I think that's really cool.
That is
interesting.
Very cool.
Parker, we actually met in an adaptation class.
We did, yeah.
We met in Prose to Screenplay. And I think that class really helped me not... a lot of people have problems with film adaptations of books because they want it to be the book.
Yeah.
And they want it to be this, and they want it to do service to the book. And even watching Orlando this week, having read the book, I was like, oh, it's kind of a shame that this was cut and this was changed. But I think that class really helped me understand that an adaptation is not beholden to what the source text is.
No.
Right? It is an artist's interpretation of another piece of work. The other piece of work is not changed or ruined by an adaptation.
Right.
But I do think it's something that we were kind of talking about after we watched it, was, I think it helps when there's been more than one adaptation of something in that way. I think that helps the public have a better response to it.
Totally.
But yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting that. What do you think about that quote?
I like that a lot, and I think that's very interesting because I agree that adaptation should be a transformative process. I think that the source text already exists. There's no point. We've it's not entirely one-to-one, but it still applies. We've seen that conversation come up with the live action Disney remakes and the new Avatar: The Last Airbender series, where it's the original exists. Like, it's out there. Like, you can just go watch Lion King. You don't have to, like, why are we doing this shot for shot and bringing nothing new to the table, you know?
Right, yeah.
And I also, like, you know, when I was younger, there was a lot of, like, that sentiment of just, like, well, the book's better, and, you know, all adaptations suck and all these things. And it's like, I've grown some more nuance with that. There was a adaptation class I took in my undergrad that kind of opened my eyes to all of that. And then even more so that prose to screenplay class we took of just saying, you know, it should be something new. You should take the essence of the work and find interesting things that you want to say and do with it. And I think there comes a point where you can lose that, right? Like, if this movie, and it is not this at all, obviously, I'm drawing an analogy of, like, if this movie took the source material and then, like, used it to make a film that is just a weapon against the idea of transness, and just like, this is stupid and silly and wrong, like, then you are losing the core of the source material you're adapting from, and that's a bad adaptation, right? Yeah,
it shouldn't be unrecognizable or betray the point of the original text.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess that, again, it shouldn't. Because at that point, make your own thing,
right?
You know, but I think there is more freedom there, and I just really like that way of putting it. Of, like, sometimes you have to be cruel to the novel in order to be kind to the film. I think another good example of this would be, you know, another previously claimed to be unadaptable text, which is Dune, which has now been accomplished completely successfully with massive, you know, audience and critical acclaim. And I think that that's also something that changes things, and you have to change things.
Totally. Because I mean, like, you jumping off of your Dune example, I know that there's been some stink up with some people about the most recent Dune film and the changes to, like, Chani's character, where people are like, I don't like that her end point is different than it is in the book. And, like, Denis has come forward and talked about in interviews, like, it serves this story better.
Yeah.
And it does. 100% it does. But, like, again, it doesn't have to be entirely faithful to the adaptation. It has to be faithful to the film.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be kind to the film.
Yeah, I like that.
Doing. That being said, I still, you know, in 2024, it is still kind of odd to have this film kind of have a take that is more based in gender binary. I think that's really where we're kind of coming from, is just that obviously with our kind of lens, we want it to be something different.
Right.
But I do think, I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm like, this is invalid. But
no, not at all. But it's just like, I think, like you said, like, the whole point of the show is that art is subjective and we bring our own energies to it. And, like, something I recognize about myself is that, like, that, you know, talking about that quote where the director was saying, in the film, like, it is this crisis moment of masculinity that causes the switch. And as somebody who feels very affirmed in my own masculinity, but also has grown up all around with people questioning my masculinity because I am a sensitive, intuitive person, I think that's, like, a personal rub up against for me. It's like,
absolutely.
Well, you can not like violence and still be masculine. Like, you can not like death and still be masculine. And that's, like, a feeling I have that I'm bringing to the movie that isn't the fault of the film.
Yeah. So I didn't want it to feel like I was like, Parker, you can't not like this. It's adaptation. Or, you know, I get you. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was kind of an interesting point. I remember I was like, is this the first adaptation that we've looked at? It is not. Absolutely, it is not.
Not by a long
Crouching
shot.
Tiger, Hidden Dragon was an adaptation. Literally, like, Forrest Gump is technically an adaptation.
Max reads one book and says, "Oh, have we ever covered an adaptation? I don't think we have."
Yeah, this is actually the first book I've ever read.
Wow. Big.
It was really cool. It was like watching a movie in your brain. Well, off of that point, in this interview with BFI, they also asked Sally Potter where her interest in Orlando began. For context, Sally Potter was a short filmmaker. She got started in like making, her uncle gave her an 8mm camera when she was a kid, which I think is so many filmmakers' origin stories.
I love the 8mm origin story.
Love a family member gives you camera.
My favorite trope.
Now what are you going to do with it? She started there. She is very experienced in dance and theater and all of this. But she says that when she first read Orlando as a teenager, she remembers watching it as a film. And from the first moment she considered doing an adaptation, she thought she could see it, even if parts were out of focus. She says the book has a live visual quality to it, which was affirmed in Wolfe's Diaries, where she said that what she was attempting with Orlando, unlike her other books, was an exteriorization of consciousness. She was finding images for a stream of consciousness instead of using a literary monologue. And she says, but the single idea that was sustaining enough for me to live with the project for so long was immortality, or the question, what is the present moment? And the second idea was the change of sex, which provides the most obvious narrative structure, and is a rich and lighter way of dealing with the issues between men and women. The more I went into this area and tried to write a character who was both male and female, the more ludicrous maleness and femaleness became, and the more the notion of the essential human being that a man and woman both are predominated. So I think that's really interesting, because clearly as she was writing this, she was like, oh man, like the idea of like maleness and femaleness is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We are actually quite the same. And I guess I just didn't quite get that sense.
Yeah.
But obviously they turn to camera and they say there's no change in Orlando at all. Which I would say, yeah. Yeah. But also, I don't know. I think it's interesting. It would be interesting to see more of that, of like,
totally.
I wish that this spent more time with Orlando, and especially if Orlando can speak to the audience in the way that she does. I wish that she had been, I think a more internal journey for Orlando in this would have been interesting to see as well, I should say.
Yeah, like I think that's something, having not read the book and just watching the film, I think that's something I would have loved to see a little bit more of, is that like so much of what the film has to say about these topics are told to us through other people. Like during the society section, she sits down with these three lords who have really unkind things to say about women. And Orlando is very taken aback, like, now that she is a woman, that they're being so blatant and brazen in front of her about this, when she's like, oh, not that long ago I was a man, and was like, you see it in Tilda Swinton's performance, and I would have loved to just spend a little bit more time, that like there's something behind her eyes going on of like, was I having these kinds of conversations and never realizing it? And there's, I love those interesting ideas. And they introduced this idea of turning to the camera and breaking the fourth wall. And I would have loved to see that utilized a little bit more for that internality that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. In the interview with the BFI, she says that the speeches of Orlando to the audience took many forms during the writing. And during the shooting, they were the hardest things to get right. The phrase I used to Tilda was golden thread. We were trying to weave a golden thread between Orlando and the audience through the lens of the camera. One of the ways we worked in rehearsal was to have Tilda address those speeches directly to me to get the feeling of an intimate, absolutely one-to-one connection, and then to transfer that kind of address into the lens.
Ooh, I like that.
This is pretty early in modern sense of fourth wall breaks, Yeah. Still within 10 years of kind of fully, right?
At least fourth wall break as a dramatic device, because comedic device had been used for ages in film. You look back at all sorts of different things that they're playing around with that, but it almost always was used as a gag.
Right.
So being used in a dramatic sense.
Obviously, breaking the fourth wall is obviously a theatrical term. It's not like this invented breaking the fourth wall.
Right, but on film specifically, yeah.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I find it interesting to have her. I also love how she will, and Orlando the character will just look, they don't always say anything, right? It'll just be a look for a brief moment, and it's really good.
It is really good.
And I really enjoy that aspect of this film. Yeah, I don't know. I think I said it in my Letterboxd review. Everyone go follow us on Letterboxd, obviously.
Plug.
But I do like that this film really takes to heart, I feel, that section of the book in which Virginia Woolf writes that there is much to support the view that it is clothes that wear us and not we them. Clothes are but a symbol of something hid deep beneath. And so much of what they're doing to change Tilda's appearance is just clothes and hair.
Yeah.
They actively avoided any fake facial hair. Sally Potter thought that would, draw people's attention too much. They'd be looking for the glue and the seam. And I think it works. Like, I think, like you said, it's otherworldly, but I think that's just by nature of having Tilda Swinton in a role at all. She has a very otherworldly
very much so
presence to her.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I'm also glad they didn't do any like fake facial hair. I like that they let Orlando be a bit of a twink, That's great.
Yes, Parker, I think they did. Yeah, they let him. I mean, that is a big part of like the opening of saying that, he was a nobleman at a time when, men were aiming for femininity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Is this the full discussion? Is that
it might be. I mean, I don't know what else I'd want to add.
I will say favorite things in this. I do love the lingering shot of Billy Zane when they're in bed together. And it feels like, am I just kind of wild for this? But like, it feels like they're asking us to consider his femininity.
Totally.
Like,
no, I was picking up on that.
Yeah.
I really like that shot. Like, there's just
really,
yeah. Men and masculine presenting individuals on film are so rarely photographed that way. You know what I mean? Like in those intimate spaces, it's usually like a smolder. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like it has a different energy, and this was like so soft.
Yeah. It almost feels like they softened the lens a little bit. Like
like it looks
kind of that what did they put on the lens?
Vaseline.
Yeah, it was almost had that like Vaseline glow to
totally.
it, which initially I was like, wait, are they trying to like blur out his facial hair? And then I was like, no, that's just
it's like, they did that for every shot that Ingrid Bergman is in Casablanca, of just like this kind of glow around her.
Yeah, he's kind of glowing and he's just laughing and smiling while he's like looking at us. And it's very intimate, and I was like,
very much so.
Yeah. I think it's a good movie.
Yeah, I think it's a good movie.
As for the Citizen Kane comparison,
the criteria.
Yeah, now we have to do the boring part of the show.
Have to do the thing that we do on the show.
Now we have to do the thing that's the title of the show. Historical and technical relevance. This did influence the 2020 or 2021 Met Gala theme of like time or something like that.
Oh, cool.
There you go. Like the labyrinth scene especially directly influenced that. It's recently, it's always kind of been, it was shown as part of like a 2017 like gender kind of conference situation, from what I understand. Again, I kind of skimmed over that part. But as far as like influence on film, it was nominated for 2 Oscars. I bet you can't guess which 2, Parker.
Editing and costumes.
Production design and costumes. Yeah. But editing, that's fun. Yeah. Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Right?
There's not really much of an argument there.
Yeah. How well do you think it's doing what it's trying to do?
I think it's doing it pretty well. Again, like trying to take the film as the film, removed from the context of the book that you've told me about. I think it's doing a pretty good job overall of like this kind of ethereal folktale legend kind of feel. Like it feels very much like something that would have been told orally and passed down to the generations of like, oh, and then we're here. And like, it kind of follows that structure very nicely. What about you? What do you think? How do you think it's doing a good job of what it's trying to do?
I think it absolutely is, especially for, being a film that is adapting something that was previously said to be unadaptable to film. I think it makes its points very well. Like, I think it's very clear what it's saying about, gender and clothes and everything with that. I think it's not on the film's fault at all. I think the film's doing a very good job of it. I think just having read the source material there's such like a deeper sense, obviously, because books are allowed to go deeper in that way.
Yeah.
But as far as what the film's doing, I think it is doing what it's doing very well. Do I think it's doing it better than what Citizen Kane is doing?
Mm.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm also not sure. This might be just like recency bias within my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Part of me feels like the deciding factor for me would be that like so much of this film is abstract and surreal in so many ways, like just the nature of the story that's being told and the way it's being told. And like, it's interesting to me, like that angel shot is so out of left field.
It is.
Like nothing in the movie aside from this magical realism of never growing old establishes that we're living in that kind world, you know?
Where a golden angel can show up at the end?
Yeah, like it felt like a Terry Pratchett ending. I was like, what is this? That's crazy, you know?
Yeah.
And so just like, I wonder if I would think this movie is doing a better job of what it's trying to do if it was more Daisies-esque, you know?
Sure.
If it from the get-go is like, these are the rules we are playing within, and really leaning into that. But
yeah,
most of the film is shot and acted and presented as any other period drama.
Right. Yeah.
Which I'm not sure if is like a strength or a weakness. I haven't made up my mind.
Might I also suggest that the fact that this film works at all when it's structured in such an interesting way where it's like at the midpoint, the character has this massive change, which obviously makes sense. Like that's how films are structured. But like the fact that it's going from time period to time period and manages to not lose you when it's going between time periods, you know, like obviously it does put in big text the time that it is, but like there is a much messier version of this movie.
Yeah.
You know, but as to your question, like I did kind of think while I was reading the book and while I was rewatching the movie, I was kind of like, this almost needs more abstraction, which brings us back to like her quote of like, yeah, it has to be pragmatic. It has to be. It has to give reasons for things. And I kind of question that, you know, I just kind of wonder if this almost plays like a mid, like I feel like this would play really well as a midpoint between like Daisies and the Grand Budapest Hotel, like right, like it feels very kind of Wes Anderson as far as like its structure.
Yeah,
but I don't know if I want it to lean more. Yeah, I feel like the abstraction of it would have been like if you're talking about like the exteriorization of consciousness and like a stream of consciousness narrative. But then do you lose like any context? Do you lose, you know, like.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really interesting. I think for what she set out to do, you know, we can talk all about how we think the story should have been a little more abstract. It should have done this and this and this. But as far as what she set out to do, I think she made exactly what she wanted to.
Yeah.
I don't think any part of this feels like a studio note. None of this feels like, you know, it doesn't feel like it. I think, like you said, the angel is really the only thing that feels really like, well, hang on, we weren't doing this.
It's like, did you suddenly hire Terry Gilliam to come and do B-roll for you?
Yeah, like it's really out there right at the end.
Yeah.
Whereas she spends most of the film being very pragmatic. I forgot about that ending to the point that I didn't remember it until we reached that field with the camcorder, and then I literally started saying out loud, "Oh no, wait." Oh,
yeah,
I forgot
about
this.
I was like, what is about to happen?
The angel really throws me.
Yeah, it also throws me.
I understand that it's the same actor from before who was singing the song for Queen Elizabeth, played brilliantly by Quentin Crisp, by the way. Like hiring an aging like gay icon to play really Queen Elizabeth is so awesome.
I think like that a lot.
That's a great selection. Like that's such a good idea for what you're doing thematically. I don't think I can disqualify it from The Angel alone. But I do think Citizen Kane is doing it a little bit better.
I think it is too.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think we can
glad
give the point to Kane.
Glad that wasn't controversial. I said it with the tone that it was controversial.
No, I'm on board.
Do you like it?
I do like it.
Do you like it, Parker?
Yeah, I like the movie. I do like the movie. And like, in my experience, it's a sign of a movie that I really enjoy when like my brain is thinking about so many different ways of like how it could be stronger in what it's already doing, right? Rather than just like changing it whole cloth. Because like we got that with like Greatest Showman of just like, why isn't it Bailey? It's right there. You know what I mean? Like, and there were so many of those. And this one is just like, I don't know. I think it could be cool if it leaned into abstraction a little bit more and had a slightly more nuanced take on, gender binary and stuff like that. But those are good problems to have with a movie from 1992. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I enjoy this quite a bit.
Yeah, I also really enjoy it. I mean, I read the book. I liked the movie so much. I did rate it a little lower than last time.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I think that I matched you. Mm-hmm. I just think that it's still really solid though.
Yeah.
I don't want that to seem like a knock on it. I just think
no, 4-star movie is not a bad movie.
And especially after reading the book, like that's the main reason that I was like, okay.
Totally.
Because we're not immune to liking a book more than a movie.
No.
Naturally. It's a different thing. Yeah, I really like it. Obviously, I think I want to watch it about as often as I watch Citizen Kane.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat.
I think I could put either one on,
Yeah.
I think that they're both pretty solid.
I agree.
Obviously.
Yeah.
One more thing that we did forget to mention before we completely wrap up the show here is that in our kind of little bit of research we did right after we finished watching this together, I can't find it now, but we did find a quote from Sally Potter in which she begged people to not refer to this as a feminist film.
Yeah.
And she specifically was able to say that she felt that label had put a sour taste in people's mouths, and she was like, please don't call it that.
Yeah.
And I just find it interesting. We literally, I think, whooped about it at the time. We were like, that's the thing. Like every single film that we've covered on this podcast this year directed by women has felt fairly, and it can be anti-patriarchal and it can feel very much that, but has explicitly been asked by the filmmaker to not be referred to as such.
Yeah.
And I just find that interesting. I just wanted to make that one more note.
I do find that interesting as well.
We should continue to track this thread as we continue to follow films, you know? But like we said last time, not every movie, just because it's about patriarchy or gender, doesn't,
Yeah.
It is funny, it's exactly what we said on Daisy. So we don't have to reiterate that point. I just thought that was worth bringing up.
I'm glad you brought it up because, that was interesting to notice as well, for sure.
Yeah. Now, Parker, you may have noticed that we are almost to the very end of our episode.
Yes.
And that it hasn't been 400 years.
You're right.
But I think that at this time I'd like to read a passage from Virginia Woolf's Orlando, which I think might help us understand how it hasn't been 400 years.
I thought you were going to help it reach 400 years.
No.
It's a long passage.
Yeah, it's really long. Just to stretch out the episode, I'm going to read the entirety of Orlando at, 0.5 speed.
Oh, perfect.
No, but this says, but time, unfortunately, though it makes animals and vegetables bloom and fade with amazing punctuality, has no such simple effect upon the mind of man. The mind of man, moreover, works with equal strangeness upon the body of time. An hour, once it lodges in the queer element of the human spirit, may be stretched to 50 or 100 times its clock length. On the other hand, an hour may be accurately represented on the timepiece of the mind by 1 second. This extraordinary discrepancy between time on the clock and time in the mind is less known than it should be and deserves fuller investigation. But the biographer, whose interests are, as we have said, highly restricted, must confine himself to one simple statement. When two co-hosts reach the end of their episode, time It's been an hour. There we go. Whatever.
Yeah.
I tried to come up with a funny little button on that. I couldn't. But I just think, I think Orlando isn't better than Citizen Kane.
I don't think it is either. Like, our criteria says that it's not, and taking a step back, I would agree with you. I like it a lot. And
I like it a lot. Again,
I am exactly comparable on the amount of time I would want to turn either of these movies on.
Yeah.
But I think taking a step back, it is not better than Citizen Kane.
I do think it's worth a watch.
Totally. Absolutely.
I think more people should watch this film.
Yeah, I think they should.
I think it's really cool and really interesting, and Tilda Swinton's great in it.
Yeah.
And with that, Parker, it's the end of our show.
The end of the show. We did it.
We did it. What are we watching next time, Parker?
Next time is my annual birthday pick, because my
happy
birthday is coming
Parker.
up. Thank you. Yes, thank you. It'll be right before my birthday when this comes out.
Wonderful.
But Max was very obliging to me and has graciously allowed us to take a look at one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
Tom Hanks's That Thing You Do, 1996.
Yeah. We're staying in the 90s.
Very excited about.
Staying in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be watching the extended cut. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because you and I had watched the theatrical cut, and now we're going to watch the extended cut.
Now
And I'm interested to see what you think of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
It's a fun little movie.
It's a fun one. It's a fun little movie.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about the extended edition, as I've never seen that one before.
Mm-hmm.
As always, thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you as always.
Bye. Real quick, before we go, just promise me that you will never age, you will never wither, and you'll never die. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.